Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're going to let people filter in for a moment, and then we will start our broadcast. While people are filtering in, I'd like to remind people that in this webinar, there will be an opportunity to ask questions of the facilitator and the panelists. Please use the Q&A function and to type your questions. That will be the channel that will be monitored most. I would avoid the chat for Q&A questions. The chat is best used for conversations amongst participants. Thank you for joining us, and we're going to get started.
Hello everybody, it's with tremendous pleasure that I welcome you to our first virtual annual meeting 2020. I would like to first introduce myself, Amish Rauf, immediate past president of GDN, a consultant with over 2 decades of experience working with institutions such as CDSL, a securities depository, worked on large-scale IT and organizational projects spanning both the public and private sectors. More recently, I had been working in the area of transforming the way Indian government delivers public services of providing academic awards electronically. Team GDN decided to create these webinars as a way to gather everyone virtually. These next few days are going to be all about us. More importantly, we'll spend valuable one-on-one time with each and every one of you so that you know your voice is not only being heard but valued. So why are we here in the first place? And I think the answer is, with people's experiences, distinction between real life and digital, that sort of melted away. Participants first focuses on the needs, being imaginative and visionary in terms of what we are actually going to be doing. The only way we are going to get there is by delivering that transformation in small sizes quickly. So I would like to say we are a part of a worldwide digital movement. Over the next few days, hosting these webinars will help us hone in on the skills we have been interested in learning. Thank you so much for your time and commitment in joining us. Looking forward to seeing everyone out there in Ottawa, Canada next year for the GDN Annual Meeting 2021.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Groningen Declaration Network, webinar number 2. I'm Leave No Student Behind, Equitable Approaches to Mobility. My name is Kathleen Massey, and I'm the facilitator of today's session. I am the current president of the Groningen Declaration Network and also Associate Vice President Students at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. We're delighted to have you join us today. Thank you for being here. I would like to extend our apologies. Joanne Douglas is unable to join us today due to illness. She extends her apologies and hopes to see you again soon, either at a future webinar or perhaps at the conference in Ottawa in 2021. The Groningen Declaration Network seeks to ensure that citizens worldwide are able to consult and share their authentic educational data with whomever they want, wherever they want, wherever they are. They may need to do this to pursue further educational goals, apply for work, to emigrate, or perhaps for other reasons. It is possible to do this securely through trusted networks and in a timely manner. It should be easy. Above all, it should be accessible to people across the world, regardless of their circumstances. Today's panel discussion examines the issue of digital credentials and learner mobility through the learner's eyes. As such, the primary objective of today's webinar is to listen to the voice of the learner, and we'll hear from 3 panelists who are students, recent graduates, and leaders to understand their perspectives on what the key priorities should be as we develop digital educational credentials and document sharing networks worldwide. We will invite them to discuss the issues through the lenses of personal agency, accessibility, equity, credential recognition, and mobility. I'll facilitate the discussion today among the three panelists. We will begin with the current state, identifying issues and challenges. Then we'll turn to a discussion about the future. Finally, you, the audience, and thank you for being here today, you, the audience, will be invited to weigh in with questions and observations for the panelists. We are very interested in hearing from you. And again, please type your questions using the Q&A functionality. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the panelists, and they'll tell you a little bit about themselves. First, Gohar Hovhannissian. Gohar, over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen, and hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me in this panel discussion. I'm very happy to come here and speak on behalf of the European students, as I am the Vice President of the European Students' Union, which is an advocacy organization based in Brussels, and we represent 46 national student unions from around 40 European countries. So we do not only work for European Union countries and student movements, but the whole European continent. So it is my honor to be here and to speak on behalf of my organization and the organizations that we represent.
Thank you, Gohar. And now over to Celine Thomas. Celine?
Hi, everyone. As Gohar said, it's a blessing to be here and a very big honor to share this platform with many other creative and young-minded students and leaders. I am Celine. I graduated from McGill University in 2017 with a bachelor's in international development studies. I've been living in Montreal, Canada ever since, working for a local nonprofit called the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness. One really informative part of my McGill experience was the ability to go abroad for exchange to Singapore. And it's brought so much diversity and knowledge to my experience. And so I'm happy to share more about that experience and how it was being able to go abroad and have the transfers come back. In my current work, I work with students and recent grads to connect their academic research to community-led research. And through my work as well, I've had the opportunity to learn more about inequities and barriers to education for youth across Canada, particularly refugees and Indigenous youth. And this year I've also been applying to grad school. So again, working with the credential and transfer system has been a very easy process for me. So I look forward to bringing some personal and professional experience to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Celine. Abdullah Mousli, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Abdullah Mousli. I am a student at the University of Lethbridge. I'm also a Syrian refugee. I've studied in 3 different countries, Syria, Jordan, and Canada. I'm also the co-chair of WUSC ULETH local committee. WUSC is a Canadian non-for-profit organization that works to sponsor refugee students to continue their education on Canadian campuses. So basically, like, I have the personal experience on transferring my credentials between 3 different countries that basically they didn't have the same systems like to transfer my credentials. And also I work, like, every year we work with to bring people from disadvantaged countries to come and continue their education in Canada. And most of these countries also don't have systems that transfer or translate to first world countries. So yeah, I'm excited for this conversation, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdullah and Gohar and Celine. We're really grateful that you could be here. As I said in my introductory comments, it is such a pleasure to hear your voices as leaders, students, and alumni, recent graduates, because after all, at the end of the day, the work that we're doing and that we're so passionate about and committed to is to support you and to make the world an easier place for mobility, to support easier mobility across the world. And your voices are key to that. So we're very excited about hearing your thoughts about how we can do this well. Thanks again. So what we'll do is, audience, I want to turn to you now and just remind you that we will initiate the panel discussion. Each panelist will have an opportunity to answer each question. And then we'll begin with current state, and then we'll move to future state, their recommendations about how we can improve things. And finally, we will turn it over to you, audience, to ask your questions using the Q&A function. Type your questions there, and we would be happy to ask the panelists some of your questions as well. And of course, we'd like to hear your comments. So thank you again for joining us today. This is terrific. Now, we will start with the first question, which is intended to be quite general, and it is again about current state. I'll begin with this general question about challenges. And I'll ask the panelists, what are some of the challenges learners encounter when studying in different parts of the world, particularly when they apply for admission to another university or college, apply for jobs, or perhaps apply to emigrate? Can you share with us what you have observed in terms of the challenges experienced? And who would like to go first? Please jump in, whoever would prefer. Celine, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I will say I like to recognize I come from a very privileged position to have gone to university, to have had a very easy experience with the transfer and credential system. So where I'm coming from presents some minor challenges, but I try to weave in what I've heard from others who have had much more difficult times going abroad, studying abroad. For personal experience and exchange, two things come to mind. One is, as a student, it's very hard to plan your courses and your exchange program a full year out. I believe if we had a more online centralized system, we would be able to shorten and fast track that process for applications to study abroad. And I think this would give more opportunities to those in more technical programs who have to really plan out their courses way in advance to have that opportunity to go abroad, to learn abroad, to study abroad. Another thing that comes to mind is language barriers. Many terminologies in the North American system don't carry over to some of the countries you go to when you study abroad. For example, classes don't mean the same thing here in Singapore, where it was called modules. So just like I had access to a course equivalency database, it would be really helpful to have a handbook or course equivalency for terminologies that different education systems use around the world. From what I've learned from others who have had very difficult experiences, one is around just getting your transcripts from your host university to send to your partner university and back when you come back from exchange. It can take months of planning to get your transcript back, and often those courses do not match what your home university requires of you. And there's a very big difference in studying in the global south and trying to bring those transcripts back versus studying in the global north and bringing them back to the global south. So I think that dichotomy there needs to be addressed in order to make it a more even playing field for students from all over the world to study in different parts of the world. And lastly, I'll just bring in the point that for many technical degrees, you spend way more hours trying to find courses and universities that match your program where you're studying. When you think of law degrees, med degrees, and engineering degrees, students spend so much more time looking for universities and courses that would even recognize their current courses and their elective courses if they go abroad. And there's so much value to being able to study abroad, regardless of your degree. So how can we even out that playing field for those who are in more technical degrees? So I'll leave it there as some of the barriers I've encountered and some of the barriers I know some of my colleagues and friends have encountered.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that you brought up the point about recognition and difficulties gaining recognition for the courses, classes, or modules that you've taken and the differences in the systems. Would anybody like to comment on the question of recognition of credentials or courses? Gohar? I see you nodding.
Yeah, indeed. I'll be happy to comment on that. I think there are two parts when we speak about recognition. One is when we talk about kind of full degree mobilities, you know, when students would go to another country to take another level of studies or to apply for a job market, and they need these institutions to recognize the credentials that they brought from their own country. And then another one would be about short-term mobilities, when you go from one country to another one during one study program. So regarding the first one, I think we still have so much work to do when it comes to qualification frameworks and making sure that qualification frameworks of different countries speak to each other and kind of have a common language of understanding each other. Like in Europe, there is a European qualifications framework in place, and a lot of discussions are going on there. But I believe still, when we talk about how really automatic is this, it's not. And when we go even beyond Europe, it's even more problematic. So, and here is a lot about how the recognition agencies are, you know, working towards building these common bridges of understanding. And a lot of the times, of course, it's understandable that there is huge work needed to do from the side of the recognition agencies, whether they are national agencies or university agencies. But what digital technologies can just help us to do is to make these processes so much easier, to make them so much paperless, and, you know, do a lot of economy of time and extra work that we need to do. So we just need to figure out how to make sure that digitally we can speak to each other and ensure that there is recognition in place. And another thing which is especially visible during the short-term mobilities, but maybe also with the long ones too, comes to how the learning outcomes that are being defined in different study programs actually support for students to be later recognized. Because a lot of the times universities may define learning outcomes which to another country or to another university would not even like make sense. You know, they wouldn't be able to understand what these specific learning outcomes mean when they read it. So I think this is another part that we need to make sure that our different systems of education speak to each other when it comes to defining learning outcomes, allocating credits to these learning outcomes in order to make them more or less measurable time-wise and workload-wise. And again, here, if we integrate digital technologies in all these procedures, this will just help to make our lives so much easier.
Thank you very much, Gohar. I was making a lot of notes as you were speaking, so thank you very much. I like the idea of shared language that both of you have raised, shared terminology as being one helpful way, and certainly this notion of shared definitions of any kind related to outcomes as well. So thank you very much. Now, Abdullah, I would like to give you an opportunity to jump into this conversation. You have an interesting story that you may wish to share, and then we're going to turn to some of the questions in the Q&A to augment the conversation. Abdullah.
It's definitely hard to follow Celine and Gohar because I feel they covered everything, but I definitely would like to join Celine with the idea that a lot of credentials that come from the global north are more recognizable. So like just by going to a university in like Europe or North America, like automatically your credentials are transferable all over the world. But a lot of people work hard on their degrees and their credentials in other places in the world, and basically their credentials are only recognizable in a very small part. And that's what brings me to, like, in my opinion, the biggest challenge for learners and people who would like to immigrate or like transfer their credentials. I think the biggest challenge is the waste of time and talent for them. Because I know a lot of people personally who moved to Canada from different parts of the world, whether the Middle East or Southeast Asia. They have engineering degrees, they have medical degrees, but they come here and none of their degrees is it just takes way longer for their degrees to transfer. So it's not recognizable. Like Canada would recognize it, but it will take them 4 years to get their degrees transferred, which is I think in my opinion that's a lot of waste for like time and talent. Like there will be shortage for medical staff, yet you have doctors who work at a coffee shop because the systems just don't talk to each other effectively. Yeah, I think that's my opinion.
Thank
Short.
you very much, Abdullah. So you work with WUSC, World University Services Canada, which you described as a not-for-profit earlier, supporting refugees, students who are supported by various universities, indeed supported by the students at those universities, to pay for them to come and be able to study. Have those students encountered any unique challenges?
A lot of students do that, and the problem is like even the system like WESC is one of the only organizations in the world that focus their efforts on young adults and specifically for education, not just basically rehoming somebody or like resettling somebody to Canada or the States or a more stable country. But I think just the way the systems work, there is a lot of like the system exclude a lot of refugees who have credentials from, like if you were born and raised in a refugee camp, you have your credentials in a specific language. But all these credentials don't transfer. Like you don't even fulfill the criteria to even apply for the program. So and even here, like when even the students who are qualified, who have they have to get their high school or their credentials in specifically in English or French, so they can, if it's in French, they would go to Quebec. A lot of the times the systems just don't work. Like in our previous meetings, like I brought up one of the students. We were reviewing the profiles for our next student, and one of the students, he came from an African country, and the scale there was like the opposite of what we would expect. So we were ranking the student, and the scale there was 0 is the highest and 10 is the lowest. So we were ranking the students and we were like, oh wow, like this person is getting like 8 and 7, and we were like, that's a 9, like this is pretty good, like most of. And then we sent that to the admission office, and like we almost made the mistake. Then we talked to we almost made the mistake of admitting the lowest, like the student who performed the lowest academically. Then we had to talk to WESC headquarters in Ottawa, which like the process took us like over a month and a half just to figure out that, oh, this system works differently. So I think a lot of these systems just don't talk to each other like effectively, which, as I said, like it results in huge time waste for a lot of people, like especially if you're in a disadvantaged position. Like if you're living in a refugee camp, I think a month or 2 or a year, it means way more than if you're living in the comfort of your home in a safe place.
Right.
So I think time is a huge factor, especially for people who are in disadvantage.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. There's actually a question from Naveen Chara in the chat for you specifically, Abdullah. It's, can you describe your experience in obtaining your academic record from Jordan and Syria? How was your record evaluated in Canada?
Well, I would describe it in like frustrating. Not all my credentials were recognized in Canada, and especially like bringing my credentials like from Syria, for example. I studied in Syria for a year. I studied architecture in the University of Damascus, but when I moved to Jordan, because of the war, I wasn't able to attend my transcripts, which I studied also architecture in Jordan, but I had to start from scratch. Then I had a diploma from Jordan in multimedia, a 2-year diploma. And when I moved to Canada, I'm studying multimedia, new media at the University of Lethbridge. And none of my credentials in Jordan was transferred to Canada. So like in Jordan, obtaining these transcripts was very easy, but it was not recognized, even though I'm in my 4th year now. And from a student perspective, a lot of the topics overlap, and a lot of the subjects overlap, and there's a lot of similarities between what I did back in Jordan and what I'm doing right now. But I had basically, because of because one of the war and the old systems that the University of Damascus used. Like you have to actually get a piece of paper and a stamp, and then you go and you go to the embassy to the country where you're transferring and you get it stamped again. Like it's a long process, and I didn't have the option to do that back in Syria. So I had to start from scratch multiple times. That's why I'm a 25-year-old man who's about to graduate now. My peers had graduated 4 or 5 years ago. So it's just that's what I mean. Like there's always like time waste for people who come from this like, and I think this is like the biggest currency we have. So it's just frustrating to see our system just contribute to more time waste.
I appreciate that expression, waste of time and talent. And certainly when it comes to issues of printed documents, paper documents, that this is exactly what we're trying to move away from, to ensure that they're digitized, ensure that they're digitized worldwide for everyone. To put the power and agency, is what I call it, into the hands of the learners so that you can release that document to anyone you wish to do so, you wish to send it to, make it available instantaneously, and as you are, and of course securely, which is absolutely a must. And as you point out, the recognition of those credentials is essential. So a common language, a shared language. Now, you've sparked a lot of discussion, many different Q&As, questions in the chat. And so I know we have our own questions for the panel. I'm going to do one of those first, and then I'm coming back to the questions from the audience. So just 1 second while I do that. So as you think about digitization and recognition, you've mentioned some potential solutions. How would you see, what would a technology ecosystem, a digital ecosystem look like for you that would solve some of these issues? Now, don't feel like you have to name technologies. Just what functionality would it provide to you? Do you want to highlight some of the functionalities? And Celine, I'm going to start with you because you started with a comment about it made it easier when you had a course equivalency database. Could you talk about that to begin with? Start there, please.
Definitely. My university had partnerships with many universities for exchange. So they did all the background work to examine the courses that these universities offer abroad and to see and compare which ones match our home institution's university courses. So at least in the Faculty of Arts, which is a large faculty in many countries around the world, it was easy to match history courses, to match political science courses, to match economic courses, because for many countries, there's a standard curriculum for how you teach economics and so forth. So through that, I was able to assess which universities have the most course equivalencies within my own bachelor's degree. And based on that, I was able to pick my top 3 universities that I wanted to apply for exchange. And so that was just a very easy process. Now, that doesn't mean when you take those courses in your partner university and come back to have them transferred, there are a lot of bottlenecks in that process. For many universities and for many of my friends who have done exchange, particularly in the Global South, they had a much harder time getting the courses recognized in their current degree than if they went to Europe or to South America. So that was one. I love that database. It worked really well for me, but I know like it's one step in the process in ensuring that when you come back, you can get that all cleared and approved. I would say in terms of a digital platform, In just doing some readings about this, the idea of having something central, like how you access your banking information or your insurance information, like we're so used to those digital platforms and, you know, authenticating and verifying our identity when accessing those platforms. I feel something central like that, like as Kathleen, if you put it, a wallet or an e-portfolio, something like that would really, I think, work well for students around the world. And we are a generation that's grown up to be, for the most part, digitally literate. And with technology, you can make the language translations much more easier and so forth, and use AI way in the future, but hopefully to the advantage of the transfer system to make those exchanges, those recognition of credentials, the language barriers a lot more simpler. So I feel like those would be some things I'd love to see in a digital portfolio or wallet per se. And I was just speaking with our fellows right before this, because many of them have been on exchange, they've gone to do their masters abroad and come back, and it just really resonated with them, the idea that a wallet of some sort, something you could access, that you could authenticate and verify and get into without having to pay the fee of getting your transcript, even digitally, would be just a much more accessible way to know your credits are somewhere safe and to be able to access them when you want to, not when your university lets you.
Mm-hmm. Particularly important for people who are located in areas that have experienced natural disasters, where buildings are demolished, records are lost, perhaps war, as we discussed earlier. So knowing that the records are available digitally and you can always access them addresses the waste of, begins to address access to those records in a very straightforward manner, and not losing them through other mechanisms. Of course, the recognition issue is always the next challenge. There are additional questions here from the audience. So before I go to any further, I'd like to take a couple of those. Panelists, are you okay with that? Yes, so we have one. And this is: working for a government agency myself, we are always looking for ways to support students during administrative processes. Did you feel supported by agencies or organizations during your application processes, or was it an individual endeavor as on the part of the student? What do we need to do better as government agencies to help students? So you had talked about a few ideas a few moments ago. Would any of you like to highlight some ideas? Gohar, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be super happy to talk about this, because actually I, as a student back in Armenia, I had some issues related to succeeding in going for a mobility experience. And after that, I decided that I'm going to get involved with student movement to, you know, do a lot of work, especially on mobility issues. And I've been working a lot with both national agencies like Erasmus Agency, who is facilitating a lot of mobility of students, and also governmental agencies. And so also on the European level, we would hear a lot similar type of questions, like what can we do to support students? Or we sometimes see that students are not motivated to go on mobilities, or you know, they don't want to leave their country and go for mobility, or we try but it doesn't work. So I think the best here is to really not to look at these students who are to go to mobility or who are going on mobility as kind of just simple users of this mobility experience, but cooperate with them about creating this mobility experience. And this means inviting them for discussions, inviting them for giving their feedback about how the process worked for them. Me personally, I wasn't very much supported when I was taking the attempts to go on mobility, and in the end I ended up having a kind of a conflict with my vice rector at my university, just because I lacked the support. So I started taking my own initiative to figure out what shall I do, and then this resulted into a conflict. So I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of students who are also happy to give feedback after they complete a mobility experience. And this is super important, because through the students who go on for a mobility and then are eager to come back, universities or the governments can use their potential and their resource to multiply it, to spread it among other students who haven't been to a mobility yet, to bring them back and make them really feel that their contribution is useful for making improvement at their own university. And if truly there is such an approach of collaboration with students, I truly believe that they will be super eager to give feedback and support development.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That point about collaboration is exactly why we're here today with the student panel, and your thoughts are incredibly valuable. So thank you very much for sharing that, Gohar. I think I want to go to another question here, and it really does underscore some of the challenges related to privacy of the learner. So let me go to Herman Delu's question. Some of the countries that refugee students come from are known to host digital learner data in central databases. In some cases, these data can even be consulted by third persons online, for instance, in Iraq. Privacy of the learner does not always seem to be an overriding concern. And I will say, just in brackets for myself, Kathleen, it is a very important concern in other parts of the world. But back to Herman's question, privacy of the learner does not always seem to be an overriding concern, leave alone self-sovereign identity. Could any of the panelists shine a light on how they view such digital resources and their own experiences, if any, in accessing and consulting your own data, and particularly around this issue of privacy? Do you have any concerns or experiences you wish to share? Abdullah, would you, I see.
Yeah, I can go. For example, like in Syria, you can get your unofficial transcript online for like high school, for example, but that doesn't it doesn't mean anything. Like you might as well make a transcript on Microsoft Word, because if it's not stamped, if it's not authenticated from like a physical office with a physical stamp, that doesn't mean anything. The other thing, like for privacy, I think probably in third world countries, like for example in Iraq, probably they don't have like cutting edge technology or the resources or the skills that it's available for other people, especially like when you're talking about like North America or Europe. And I think for like nowadays everything is online, so I think there's a lot of like you like in our first meeting you gave an example of like online banking. For me, like this is how I do all my banking, and privacy is not a concern. Maybe a couple of years ago it would have been a concern, but I think now with a lot of ways to like verify your identity, like all other companies, like internet companies, phone companies, they do like two-step verification, where you have to like verify your identity through like email and phone numbers. So I think there are many ways to like avoid these kind of like privacy kind of like bugs. But yeah, like but I think a lot of countries, they do have that, but it's still like that's why there's a lot of people who have fake degrees in Iraq, for example. I know like my sister-in-law she's Iraqi and she's a pharmacist, and I know like after the war, after like 2003, after the American invasion, basically there were like a lot of people who had like medical degrees, engineering degrees, that they were fake. They got them from like Baghdad University or like other big universities in Iraq, but it's still, because it's the same way. Like, yeah, like you can get the template, you can get everything online by using like fake credentials. So yeah.
Thank you for bringing up the question of authenticity. I think it's an important one, along with privacy. indeed, the intention with the development of the many systems around the world is to ensure that the credentials that are issued and that are verified to be authentic in the digital ecosystem that has been created. So verified back with the issuing institution to avoid the fraud that you've identified, Abdullah, which is a significant concern in countries around the world. And I think on the issue of privacy, I wonder if what we're saying, or what you're saying essentially, is it's important for governments to have privacy legislation, privacy laws, number one. And secondly, I hear you saying it's incumbent upon technology companies to implement those laws with standards and approaches that allow people to feel confident that their data are secure. Is that what you're getting at, Abdullah?
Yeah, like 100%. I think like we just need to collaborate as as a collective to ensure that we don't have any of these bugs, because like as like the question, like yeah, there's like one system in Iraq that's like an isolated incident. Like if that Iraqi student wants to transfer their credentials to even like other countries in the Middle East, that system won't speak to other countries. So I think like we just need to collaborate as a collective to make sure that these systems like work effectively to the advantage of students.
So thank you very much for that point. And now I have a question from Francisco Maldonado about this topic. He asks, how can developed countries help underdeveloped ones to get them into the digital era of credentials and qualifications? Is it incumbent upon countries in Europe and North America and elsewhere in the world that are well developed already to help other countries that are struggling with the resources and capacity to do this? Gohar, do you have a point to make on that? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, because I was thinking about that myself, even during the previous question, when we talk about privacy and the governments to whom we cannot trust, you know, to own the data of students, and actually no one else rather than the students should be owning their data. So it's upon the companies, the organizations, as you said, Kathleen, to ensure the privacy of these data. But I think what we can do in a more developed part of the world to support the countries is like I would say the easy way would be just send your students there, send them for mobility. I have had many discussions with students from both like from underdeveloped countries and more developed countries and their mobility experiences. And we often see that the students, when they go from a developing country to a developed country to study, most of the times, you know, they have struggles in adapting to a new approach, new way, new technologies, new everything is basically very new to them. But when students from developed countries go to developing countries, they first appreciate the good place that they come from, but they also in a sense, they dare to raise some discussions, they dare to bring up some points which they might find not working really well. So like this would be a very like easy thing that I could say the developed countries could do, and hopefully, you know, when we're done with all the corona crisis and pandemic, we can go back to supporting again face-to-face mobility of students. And another thing I could also say, let's just make sure that when we create our own systems in the developed world, we take into account what are the specifics, features, you know, complications with other parts of the world where we want to support the development, where we also want to see students going out, having mobilities. So through this, we can at least help this mobile students to have easier way of going out from their own country.
So as I understand what you've said, to ensure that the systems are inclusive and reflect the diversity of systems across the world so that they're able to support them. Is this what you're getting at? Yes, yeah, thank you for that. I have, Herman asked another question that I'd like to pose. Would one way to do this be to use one language? Would we prefer one shared language, for instance, English, or a controlled translation tool that uses a huge thesaurus, such as the one provided by ESCO, in all the languages of the European Union plus Arabic? So that's what that one currently does. Ideally, I would like to hear about the Canadian experience where one deals with just English and French. And certainly I can speak from experience to say that most federal government systems are set up in both languages, whether that's their administrative systems or the communication that is used to communicate with the population in Canada. So both languages and their official translations and so on. So what do you think about this notion that Herman proposes of preferring one shared language or a controlled translation tool, so a digital tool that provides controlled translation? Would that help with all of the many issues, or several of the issues that you've identified around recognition and shared understanding? What do you think of that? Any thoughts? Who would like to jump in? Abdullah, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, does he mean the like the shared language for like teaching? So you get your entire degree in that specific, like in English in the shared language, or just the transcripts are issued in that specific language?
Well, I would go back. I understand, Herman, to refer to some of Celine's earlier points about this issue of challenges with terminology, for example, and understanding across borders in different countries what we mean by you. And Celine, you use the expression class versus module as an example. That's even just in English that there's a difference between in terminology. So it's a glossary, I think, on top of a shared language. What do you think about this?
I think the idea of like issuing all transcripts in that kind of like digital ecosystem in one shared language, I think it might be useful, but I wouldn't say that a shared, like teaching in one shared language all across the world. Like if you ask like institutions, like if you want to opt into this digital ecosystem, you got to change your education language from whatever, like from Arabic or whatever language to English, to one shared language. I think that takes away a lot of the like specific cultural values that come with educational institutions. So like that's, but I think like issuing all transcripts in that digital ecosystem in one shared language, it might be a very useful tool to avoid confusion.
So a shared administrative language, so to speak, or at least a shared tool for translation. Celine, would you like to make any additional comments related to this?
Yeah, I would say even if like regions administratively worked in one language, like North America is already in English. I'm not sure about the EU, but if like, you know, South Asia, like India is already like Hindi all the way through. Like if you even just had, you know, 10 global languages that, you know, education administrations worked with around the world, I think that would be a much easier way to translate all of them. I think there's like beauty in keeping the language of a region or a country and not wiping it with just like English or French. But in terms of usefulness, if there could be a consolidation of language administratively, even like a terminology handbook on top of that, I think that would be a very helpful tool for students going forward and administrators.
Great. Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to another, now we're into more of the future state. I'd like to go back to James, to another topic. James Keevy asks, could we envision a world where an agreed set of levels are used internationally? So this goes back to the outcomes discussion, perhaps. UNESCO has been leading discussions on this over the last few years. So envisioning a world where there's an agreed upon set of levels that can be used internationally so that recognition of credentials could happen more systematically. What do you think about that? Gohar, do you have a point you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I think actually UNESCO now is pretty much advanced with the discussions on this, because back in a few years ago they started a discussion about a global recognition convention that would facilitate recognition of different qualifications among different parts of the world. I'm not sure how much the current situations, the crisis, kind of troubled the development there. I think, yeah, like having this type of an agreement is always great. And we have something like this at the European level, the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which again incentivizes the signatories of the convention to work on recognition matters through their NIC centers, like through the recognition national centers. But again, I think just the convention doesn't really help us to do it. So there is more action necessary especially at the local levels, like at the university levels. You may go to many universities and ask many teachers and professors like, hey, you know about Lisbon Recognition Convention, and they have no idea about it. So here comes the part how we're going to make sure that the policy level discussions also go into practice and are implemented in a practice level. And I think this very much briefly links to the previous discussion that we're having about creating this common language, and what Herman brought up about ESCO skills, and about the diploma supplement that we use in Europe to make sure that our diplomas speak to each other. So this is one kind of approach of making sure that practically our policy discussions end up in having something on the ground as well. And I think there is, especially when we talk about international students understanding a different system that they go in, what particularly is important to make sure that there are introductory courses that students can take, or even introductory informal discussions that students can participate in to understand what is this new system of education that they have come in. And again, this can be so well facilitated with digital technologies, with applications for international students, with chat discussions for international students, like a lot of ways that we can think about, but we just need to do it.
Thank you very much, Gohar. Would anybody else like to make a point on that? If not, I'd like to move to the question of the impact of the pandemic on this discussion, if you're okay with that. Any other final points? Okay. So again, moving to the current state, we're all joining this webinar from different parts of the world today, from likely our home offices or some other location. Transcripts, documents are difficult to access with employees often working from home if they are not digitized, the documents that is, if they are not digitized. For you, how has this pandemic highlighted the need for enhanced digital structures, ecosystems, services? How does the current pandemic enter into this conversation? Would you, any of you, Celine, would you like to highlight any points?
Sure. I think one thing that's come to mind is the recognition of just online courses counting towards your degree. At least I can speak in Canada, many universities did not recognize or would accept you taking more online courses than say 3 to count towards your undergraduate degree. And now with full terms going online, we're now asking, what is the value of a degree? Is it the quality of the content, no matter how it's delivered, or the way it's just delivered? And it speaks to a whole issue of accessibility. Current university policies around what courses can be counted have really disenfranchised people with mental health issues, people with disabilities. And so it's really bringing to the fore that education can be more accessible. And if we just change our perspective on how we recognize courses, how we deliver courses to facilitate and recognize different learning styles and where students are at, we can make a much more accessible system for those from lower income, from those with mental health issues, from rural communities, to ensure they also have access to higher education. So I'd really hope going forward that universities would open their policies to let online courses and other online courses outside of the school environment be accepted and recognized towards their degrees.
Thank you very much. Celine, any other comments about the impact of the pandemic? Gohar or Abdullah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Celine. I think just the perspective of online courses like shifted in 1 month from being that is not serious enough to be counted for your degree, then to like, oh, online courses are great and everyone should take them, and we're not gonna, like, universities just send these emails that we're not compromising on the quality of education. It's just a different model of delivery. But I think even like with COVID and basically like the accessibility, like I think there's a lot, like it raised a lot of issues like within even Canada, like we're not even talking globally. Like I know a lot of universities now in, for example, in Egypt, in Jordan, in other countries, they don't have the kind of like digital infrastructure to actually switch their delivery model to online. So they are actually bringing students back to class, which is, it's completely unsafe. But because students still, they don't want to, like, they still want to get their education on time, and they just want to move on with their lives. So there's a lot of pressure. But even within Canada, like rural community, for example, like they don't have stable internet connections. They don't have the kind of like the technologies that we have in a city, which is like, it's bizarre to think about it, like that it's in North America. If you drive 6-7 hours outside the city, you'll have like an internet, like it's the speed of dial-up internet. So it raises even like more accessibility issues. And same thing with people with disability, people with mental health issues who need, like they need, for example, I know at the University of Lethbridge, we have the accommodating learning center. And I know multiple students, like multiple of my peers and like classmates use that because it facilitates their educational experience. Now that's gone. And I don't think till now, I don't think there's a digital substitute for that to support them through their experience. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I think what you've pointed out is this challenge that applies as well to the work of the Groningen Declaration Network. And that is the dichotomy, the irony that we are trying to create accessibility and agency, and at the same time challenged by lack of access to digital networks. So it creates some challenges regarding accessibility. So certainly this underscores the importance of collaborating across countries, across organizations, across governments to elevate all systems in order to, and policies in terms of recognition, so that there's fairness across the world, fairness and equity when it comes to sharing one's data, having autonomy over ensuring that you can do so in a timely fashion, and confidence in terms of its recognition worldwide. I would like to thank you all very much for your outstanding contribution today at today's webinar. Celine Thomas, Abdullah Mousli, and Gohar Havhanisian. You have just helped us to understand what's important to learners, recent graduates, and student leaders. I want to thank you again for the valuable comments that you've made and the great way that you've now contributed to this discussion. And so thank you very much. My thanks to Melanie Gottlieb and ACRO for supporting the delivery of today's webinar, and to all of the participants who attended today and shared their questions with the speakers. It has been, I hope, a very informative opportunity and certainly, I believe, a thoughtful discussion. So thank you again, Celine, Abdullah, and Gohar. Thank you, Melanie, and thanks everyone for joining today. All the best. See you at the next webinar. Take care.